Good evening, my darlings. I hope you're all doing well. Now it's September already, can you believe it? And that makes me excited for one very special celebration next month. Can you guess it? Yes, Halloween, of course. I have lots of exciting things planned for then. Now, what's in my creepy files today? Here we go. Have you ever woken in the night to something coming out of your bedroom wall?
I've had sleep paralysis a couple of times, and I guess it was pretty normal, or not. The first time I experienced it, I was so damn scared because it felt very real that I had to stay awake for a couple of minutes to go back to sleep again. Another one occurred after about a month after the first one happened, and then again, I had to stay awake for minutes to go back to sleep. And how do I know that it's sleep paralysis? Well, you're asleep, and then you wake up for no reason. Then suddenly, you can't move every single part of your body. You try to scream, but no voice is coming out from your mouth, and then the rest varies. Either you will hear strange and scary whispers that you can't really understand, or something will come out in the dark and will get close to you. Try to move your toe. That's what I learnt from someone years ago, whenever you experience that living nightmare, they call it. And then months have passed. I can't say that I slept peacefully every night because I have insomnia. But I no longer experience it, or so I thought. I can't remember much of that night, but I felt sleepy after dinner. I went upstairs and fell asleep, which is uncommon for me because I always go to bed very late, but I don't really care since I really want to rest. And then suddenly, I wake up, for no reason. I was about to get up to reach my phone when I realised one thing. I can't fucking move. And then I begin to hear whispers. I can say that it's coming from a girl because I just know. Well, you can easily tell when it's from a girl or a boy, right? Since I'm stupid, I try to scream, even though I know nothing will happen. I just have a bit of hope that someone might hear me. I still can't move anything, and then I'm starting to sweat. A cold sweat. Even though the fan was on. Luckily, after about a minute, it stopped. The whispers are gone. Palpitating, I took off my shirt, then wiped myself and remained awake for a couple of minutes, and then I'm starting to feel sleepy again. I went to bed and closed my eyes, hoping that I will wake up soon and it's morning, but I guess I was wrong. Suddenly, I opened my eyes for an unknown reason, and my heart started to beat rapidly. I can't move. Am I experiencing it again? I guess so, but how the fuck? This time there's no whispers, but rather a black smoke appeared at my feet. It started to move as if it was consuming me little by little. I panicked and tried to move my toe, but it feels like my whole body is already frozen, and my eyes are the only thing that I can move. The smoke is now at my thighs, and it feels so cold, and I still can't do anything but watch it eat me slowly. God, if this was only a dream. Please stop this and let me sleep. The smoke has reached my chest. It's heavy. It feels like a baby crawling at me. If I'm gonna die right now, God, please take care of my family. The smoke was gone. Also that heavy feeling. I can move my body again, and I'm still confused. And I didn't let my thoughts win me over. I grabbed my phone, and it was past 2 a.m. I drink some water and get back into my bed and let myself sleep again. I hope I can sleep peacefully now. The sound of something in the wall woke me. It's like someone is kicking the wall or banging itself to destroy it. What I fear the most is that I can't move myself again. What the hell is happening to me? Am I cursed? I cried in my mind as I found myself in tears. I'm not afraid of ghosts, but this is a different kind of horror. The banging continues, but this time the room is darker and something is coming out from the walls. They are coming out of the walls. I can see them clearly. It's like the Dementors from the Harry Potter movie. Even though I want to close my eyes, I can't. It's torture watching those creatures come out with your own two eyes. God, whatever it is, please help me. Or if they're going to come and get me, please take care of my family. I prayed in my mind while tears streamed down my eyes. Suddenly, I managed to move my toe and I woke up. I wiped my tears away and looked at my phone. 4 a.m. How did this happen? 3 times in a row. I must be going crazy. I ran to the bathroom and washed my face, and then decided not to go back to sleep and stay awake for the rest of the day. My dad got up and sees me, asks what I'm doing. I said I just woke up. I decided not to tell anyone what I had experienced that night, and I hope that will never happen to me again.
My name is Melissa. I grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida in the 1970s and 80s. My dad was a police officer, and he used to share all kinds of work stuff with me that made me feel like a grown-up. But it meant that I didn't have a childhood like other kids. While other families talked about school or sports around their dinner tables, at our house the main topic was crime. Like crimes committed by the motorcycle gangs in Daytona, to crime farther afield like the Atlanta child murders. My dad took me aside one day and said, "Girl, keep your head on a swivel and don't trust anyone." Every Sunday, I would go to church with my grandparents. They were super religious and they used to do tent revivals back in the 30s and 40s. So we'd go to church and afterwards we had a weekly ritual of eating lunch at a little restaurant around the corner from my mom's house. I'm not going to name the restaurant because it's still in business today, but they advertise as having the best chicken in town. And it was the most delicious fried chicken I've ever eaten. I can't tell you how many times I've been there, probably over 100. We even got takeout during the week most of the time too. But what we didn't know is that our food was being cooked by a serial killer. Gerald Stano was a cook there. I knew him, not personally, but on site. When my grandfather would pay our bill after the Sunday meal, I'd walk up with him because he'd let me handle the money and get change, and it was fun for me. I remember standing there waiting for the cashier and looking back in the kitchen. And there he was. He'd always smile at me and I would wave back. Nobody thought anything about it. When Stano was arrested, they came for him at his job. Man, that news travels fast and was on the TV that night. My mother was flipping out. One of his victims shopped at a small craft store that my mother and I went to all the time. When they found her abandoned car, a bag of fabric for a cheerleading costume was still in the back seat. Another woman was murdered in a wooded area less than 1/10 of a mile from my elementary school. I rode my bike past there every day for school. The restaurant and the 2 murder scenes were within a mile radius of my home. I shudder to think that the same hands that dipped and floured all that fried chicken murdered 22 women in our community. To this day, I still can't eat fried chicken on the bone. When they asked him how he would hunt victims, Stano said, "I would find a girl walking." Sometimes those girls were in my own neighborhood as he stalked young women driving to and from his job. So fast forward to 2005 in Daytona when small articles start appearing in the local newspaper. Body found near the river or local woman found dead. Very vague, no information. After a few of these popped up, I knew we had another serial killer in town. But tourism is the community's lifeblood, and it was kept very hush-hush. To date, the Daytona Beach serial killer is being looked at for 21 murders. But the case went cold, and we were left scared and wondering what was next. In 2019, everything came full circle. Law enforcement caught the Daytona Beach serial killer when his DNA was linked to 4 women murdered here from 2005 to 2007. At the time, he was being held on suspicion of another 2016 murder in South Florida. I can still hear my dad's voice saying, "Don't trust anybody." So Robert Hayes, the Daytona Beach serial killer, was a criminal justice major. He knew how to get away with murder and how to hide in plain sight. And the news media replayed Gerald Stano being arrested at that chicken joint we love so much. Go figure.
In 2009, my family and I went on a trip to Hawaii. One of the excursions we took was a night tour of some haunted locations on the island. One of the first places we stopped was this field where we were told the story of the Nightmarchers. We were told that these were warrior spirits who would move with purpose to the beat of the sounding drums. And we were told to keep an eye out for the flames or the torches that these spirit warriors would carry, or to listen for drumming. And that if we came across one of these marchers, to look away. As our tour guide told the story, I remember feeling this subtle pain in my arm. I had never experienced anything like this before. At the time, I was afraid to say anything to the tour guide, but I did mention to my family members what I was feeling. Before heading to our next location, we took a break at a rest stop. Now, mind you, along the way, our tour guide told us many stories of many different locations that we were going to and all the haunted stories that went with it. And they just seemed to get creepier. And then he mentioned attachments and how some of his guests had contacted him in the past from their hotel rooms after the tour, telling them that something wasn't right. So because of this, during this stop, I did mention to him about my arm hurting and how it felt to me as if someone had a hold of me by the arm. While the tour guide proceeded to try to rid of whatever it was that had followed me, a woman had started to snap photos. When all of this was over and I didn't feel like my arm was hurting anymore, the woman who had taken the photos asked me if I had a tattoo on my arm. I did not. When I looked at the photo, I noticed what looked like fingerprints of a large person around my upper arm. Basically right where I felt the pain. Our next stop was the Manoa Chinese Cemetery, where there is this old burnt out tree that is said to be a portal for spirits. The story was that people would report fireballs and orbs emanating from this tree. The tour guide asked for a volunteer, and of course, after what had happened to me earlier, my interest was piqued and I volunteered. I stood in the middle of this tree and just closed my eyes. I could hear everyone snapping photos while the tour guide said some spiritual words to help me connect with my father who had passed years earlier. Suddenly I felt this gust of wind, as did everyone else, and I felt a tingly sensation around my hand. I remember opening my eyes, I guess in hopes of seeing an apparition of my father, but I couldn't see anything. But I did feel as though there was someone holding my hand. I also felt the same kind of feeling behind me over my shoulder, and immediately an image of my grandmother, who I had lost as a preteen, came to my mind. At that moment, even though I couldn't explain any of it, I knew I had connected with both of them somehow in that spot, and it brought tears to my eyes. When I left the tree and headed back towards the tour group, a woman showed me a photo that she had snapped during that moment. There was an orb of light right where I had felt my hand being touched and another on my shoulder. And for me, that was enough proof at the time to tell me that what I felt was real. These experiences stuck with me upon my return home, and it launched my interest in the paranormal. I've been trying to find answers ever since. Thank you for listening to my story.
Hi, I'm Katrina Pitts, and this is my haunted story about Lake Compounce in Bristol, Connecticut. Lake Compounce is America's oldest continuously running amusement park. It lies on the town line between Bristol and Southington, Connecticut. While it is well known and loved by people in the state, Bristol and Southington locals are well aware of the park's troubled past. In a classic trope, the land was purchased by white colonists from Native American Chief Compounce, and to this day it remains cursed. Ever since the land was acquired, there have been many mysterious and tragic deaths that have occurred there. Several incidents happened in and around the notorious Grand Ballroom. In one of the earliest cases, the original owner's nephew was tragically found hanging from the rafters in the ballroom one night. Since then, park employees claim to have seen his ghost swinging from above. They also reported ghost couples dancing and twirling across the dance floor. The unsettling nature of this park was solidified in our modern era by a string of 4 deaths that occurred between 1999 to 2004. Shortly after the park's last incident, I worked at Lake Compounce for 4 summers. Every October, the park stays open and is decorated with spooky Halloween themes. It even has a few short haunted walkthrough attractions of its own. One October, I was in charge of a haunt themed with deranged 3D clowns. And of course, this attraction was housed in no other place but the ballroom. Every evening before the park opened at 5, it was my job to walk through the clown house to check for safety hazards and to turn on the special effects. Despite it still being faintly light outside, the clown props always creeped me out the most when I had to walk through alone and in total silence. One evening around 4:30 p.m., I was making my routine trek through the house before opening. I was halfway through when I heard what sounded exactly like a child laughing. I spun around, expecting to see a kid there, but I was completely alone. I finished my safety inspection as fast as I could to see if there was a child waiting for me at the end of the clown house. And just before I exited the maze, I heard a child calling, "Mommy?" Once outside the maze, I checked the entire perimeter of the ballroom to see if there was any evidence of a kid running around. Maybe the owner's son was nearby. Instead, I found absolutely no one. Not a soul. Now, given the spook factor of this park, it is not uncommon for employees to try and scare each other with pranks. So I sent a message over my radio saying, "Ha ha, very funny guys." When I explained to them what had happened, they had no idea what I was talking about. And you may be wondering what the last death occurrence at the park was in 2004. One day, a 5-year-old boy was walking with his mom outside the ballroom. Out of nowhere, a massive tree branch fell down. It sadly struck and killed the child, while his mother was spared.
My name is Cassandra, and this is my story. There are a lot of on-off experiences, but the most comprehensive one is in the house I used to live in on the coast of North Carolina. The neighborhood was at most 10 years old when we moved in, but was built on old farmland. There was an acre or 2 of woods behind our house before you hit either farmland or a different neighborhood. My sister and I would hike out in the woods sometimes since it was easy to navigate, and there was an old trash pile from when the area was farmland. I would bring back old glass bottles from the pile. Some of them were soda bottles, but I found old medicine bottles in a glass pomade jar. One day when my sister and I were in the woods, we went a little farther past the old trash pile to the edge of the woods and found an old cannonball half buried in the soil. We left it, knowing it could potentially explode if disturbed, and went back home. The discovery of the cannonball was interesting, in part because it's a cannonball, but mostly because of the weird things that would happen around the house. Sometimes during the day, we would hear music being played down the hall, but it wasn't modern music any of us listened to. It would be the sound of someone playing guitar and harmonica loud and clear. It would stop after we did a head count and realized all 4 of us were in the living room, and one of us would go down the hall to investigate. Sometimes you could hear pieces of conversation. My sister and I were home most often, so we heard the most. One day my sister had gotten home from school before me and was in the living room for about an hour. She got up and was about to go into her room when she heard someone in the living room ask, "Where are you going?" She was waiting on the porch for me after that. At night, if you went into the kitchen and looked through the sliding glass door, you could sometimes see somebody walking halfway across the yard from left to right, rather than to or from the house, and then disappear when they hit the halfway point. It was hard to see anything definite since it was dark, but we had a tall privacy fence and a guard dog. Past investigations to this mysterious figure in the backyard were fruitless since there was never anybody there. We lived in that house for about 10 years, and there was more malevolent things that happened, but I think these ones were a series of residual hauntings. After we found the cannonball in the woods, we went to Fort Macon, about an hour away. There was a map that had different trails for different wars in the area, and we found out that one of those trails was a Civil War trail that ran near our house. To us, this explained the campfire-style music, the occasional disembodied conversations, the appearance of the cannonball, and possibly the strange figure in the backyard. Maybe these men were still camped out in our suburbs, waiting to move on.
Hi, my name is Emily. I have a story for you about a possible poltergeist haunting out of Erie, Pennsylvania. About 15 years ago, my fiance at the time, our good friend, and I were living in an apartment. It was the first floor of a turn of the 20th century house that had been converted into 2 apartments. So we had the bottom floor. And we absolutely loved this place. It was beautiful. It was really perfect for 3 young 20-somethings that were really doing nothing special with their lives. Almost as soon as we moved in, we started to have some unusual things that would happen. Right off the bat, we started to have things that would go missing, and they would be missing for several days, and then they would reappear in a spot that was, for lack of a better word, it was really obvious. It would be sitting on a table that had been clean, and we walked by every day. There's no way that it had been sitting there for several days, and then suddenly and we had missed it, but suddenly it would pop up. So we would have things disappear and then reappear. We also had interesting phantom smells. The most common phantom smell that we had was the smell of pipe smoke. Now, my dad was a big pipe smoker when I was a kid, so I'm really familiar with that smell. It's sweet, it's warm, it's comforting, and that smell would absolutely just envelop our whole living room. You knew that smell right off the bat. And it would linger, kind of like somebody was just sitting there on the end of the couch having a smoke with you. And for a while, that was pretty much all we had. Some phantom smells, some things that went missing and would reappear, the occasional unusual sound that we couldn't quite place. But then we started to have what we knew as the mimic. Our apartment had 2 front doors. It had an exterior front door, a tiny little entryway, and then an interior front door that led onto some linoleum tile, kind of like a mudroom that wasn't enclosed. And it's an apartment, so it's small, it's right next to our living room. What would start to happen is that we would hear the doors, both of the doors, open and close, and then it would sound like somebody was stomping off boots in that little entryway. And it was a really distinct sound. It's very loud. You know the sound of boots that are stomping. And it's a 1-floor apartment with 3 rooms. You weren't very far from the origin of the sound. And this would happen even in the dead of summer. It would sound like somebody was walking in through that front door, stomping snow off of their boots. Erie, Pennsylvania is known for its mass amounts of snow, but we definitely don't get snow in the middle of July, at least not recently. And this would occur over and over and over. We had many people that would come and visit that would hear that stomping, that would think that we had other visitors coming over, and then go to check the door and there's nobody there. After a while, the boot sound started to be accompanied by a voice. It would say, hello, or I'm home, or a combination of the two. And often it would happen when there were only one or two of us home at the time. But the voice of it sounded like our roommate. And he himself actually heard this mimic. He heard the voices and he identified that as himself. He said, it sounds like I'm walking through the door talking to myself. Really weird. Definitely had us a little unnerved, but it didn't seem malicious. It was just unusual. So nothing really spooked us for quite a while until one day when I was home alone and something really unusual and pretty drastic happened. And this is what makes me think that perhaps it was a poltergeist. Now, like I said, we lived on the first floor apartment and we had access to the basement. In the basement, we had one of those old school Bowflexes because, I was trying to get super fit. Never really happened, but I tried. The Bowflex was sitting directly underneath of our kitchen, and the kitchen had a tile floor. So one day, I'm home alone, I'm down in the basement in the middle of the afternoon, trying to get a workout in, and I start to hear what sounds like high-heeled shoes walking around on that tile floor in the kitchen above me, and it was a really, really sharp, obvious sound of footstep after footstep after footstep, just like a casual stroll through my kitchen. Thinking this is pretty odd because, I'm home alone, so there really shouldn't be anybody up there with high heels. I went up to check. Maybe it was my mom that had stopped by, popped in to say hello. Didn't feel like shouting out or calling first. Maybe a little weird. Got all the way upstairs. There's nobody there. Definitely weirded out now, but thinking perhaps it was my upstairs neighbors that were thumping around. I said, okay, whatever, and I went back down and I tried to pick up where I left off and I started working out again. As I'm getting into it, I hear those high-heeled shoes again, and it's that really distinct, crisp sound of heels on that tile. And now I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind because I know realistically that if it had been my upstairs neighbors, it would have sounded more like elephant footfalls. Those people were loud. They had an apartment that was entirely carpeted. They were not graceful. So it didn't make sense for them to be walking around in high heels. And it didn't make sense for it to sound like it was coming from right over my head. Starting to get spooked, I went upstairs to go check again and figure out what this sound was coming from. And as I walk through the basement door into my kitchen, I see that all of my kitchen drawers, all of my kitchen cabinet doors, all of them are open. Even my refrigerator doors, both of them, the freezer, the fridge door, and I was spooked. I was really scared. So I start making my way through the apartment to go reach my landline because, 15 years ago, landlines were still a thing and I didn't have a cell phone because I wasn't cool enough. So I'm going through my apartment, quickly trying to find my landline and call somebody for help when I realized that all of the interior doors, it wasn't just in the kitchen, it was the bathroom doors, the closet doors, the front entry doors were all wide open. And I was seriously freaked. So I grabbed that phone, I ran outside, I sat in my backyard in tears, and I called up my fiance and made him come home from work. I couldn't be there alone. It spooked me too badly. Now, this is the only time that we ever had anything like that happen, anything that extreme, but it was definitely the thing that made me think perhaps it wasn't just a mimic or residual haunting, that maybe we had a poltergeist. Ultimately, whatever it was seemed to be attached to that house, to that apartment, because when we moved, we never really had anything quite like that happen again. We've had other things happen that we think might have been attached to some family heirlooms, but definitely nothing quite so drastic as all the doors being open and just the kinds of sounds and the mimic. The mimic was definitely stuck at that apartment. So thankfully, we left it behind, and hopefully whoever moved in after us didn't have quite as many problems as we did. And that's my story. Thanks for listening.
Well, that's it for tonight's stories, pussycats. Now don't forget to send in your creepy, strange but true stories to me at deadlydebbie@mail.com. And we will read it out on the show. See you next week.